Chapter 61 Reinforcements. You are listening at novelfull.audio. You're finally awake, Inuzuka-senpai. Kamate looked stoked, his eyes shining. Ugh. Inuzuka Claw groaned, lying on the grass and slowly opening her eyes. She saw Kamate's excited face and Kuramaru's dark, doggy face. Inuzuka Claw tried to sit up, but a jolt of pain shot through her back, and she nearly fell back down. Whoa, Inuzuka-senpai, take it easy. You're not fully recovered yet. It's all my fault for not studying hard enough and mastering medical ninjutsu. Kamate mumbled, hanging his head. Inuzuka Claw braced herself, enduring the pain. She grabbed onto a tree to pull herself up and shook her head. It's not your fault. Even as she said it, she winced in pain, grimacing. She looked at Kuramaru. Kuramaru, where are we? Where's that crazy lady who was chasing us? And who's this? Inuzuka Claw had passed out before meeting Umino, so she was in the dark about what happened after that. Kuramaru, with Kamate chiming in now and then, explained everything. After they'd left, Kamate had been using his palm sage technique on Inuzuka Claw to help her as they moved, but the on-the-fly treatment had slowed them down. When they weren't far from the camp, Kuramaru had picked up Tsunagekyu's scent. They'd had no choice but to get the unconscious Inuzuka Claw out of there, find a hiding spot, and focus on patching her up first. Between the big battle ahead and Ye Cang behind, and with your serious injuries, I strongly suggest you lay low and recuperate, Kuramaru advised finally. After Kuramaru finished his story, Inuzuka Claw thanked Kamate, making him blush. Then she stared at Kuramaru without saying a word. Kuramaru slowly looked away, avoiding Inuzuka Claw's gaze. After a moment, Inuzuka Claw spoke in a low voice. So, Umino-sensei, his kid, and you, Kamate, held off Ye Cang for us? Kuramaru tilted his head, silent. Kuramaru, you, Inuzuka Claw pointed at Kuramaru, lost for words. Finally, she waved her hand weakly. Let's go back. What? Kuramaru stammered. Claw, you're still injured. You got another idea? Inuzuka Claw looked at Kuramaru steadily. You think I can just chill here, knowing Umino-sensei and the others sacrificed themselves for me? Just relax and heal up. Inuzuka Claw's face was grim. They can't take Ye Cang alone. They need backup, now. Let's go. She started walking back the way they came, slowly but determinedly. Kuramaru shook his head and followed close behind. Kamate hurried ahead of Inuzuka Claw and bowed, a mix of emotions on his face. Thank you, Inuzuka-senpai. Just call me Claw. Inuzuka Claw grinned at Kamate. She clapped him on the shoulder, not really paying attention, and said, Don't sweat it, kid. I'm the one who should be thanking you. And Inuzuka doesn't leave her friends hanging in danger. She brushed past Kamate and shouted, Let's move. Kamate stared at Inuzuka Claw's back. She wasn't that tall, but right now, she looked huge. Actually, when Kamate had woken up after Inuzuka Claw saved him, he'd wanted to go back and find his teammates. Being with Inuzuka Claw was great, especially after Tsunagekure and Konoha started fighting, but he wanted to get back to his team. He was torn up about it. When he'd heard that Inuzuka Claw was going back, he was happy at first. She was a special jounin, way stronger than a medical ninja like him. Then he'd remembered her injuries, and he'd been totally conflicted. He was caught between wanting her to come with him and not wanting to be a burden. When Inuzuka Claw decided to go back to help, Kamate had felt relieved and then ashamed of his selfish thoughts. Even though Inuzuka Claw seemed clueless, she'd seen right through him and thanked him again. Kamate thought to himself that if there was such a thing as a female hero, it had to be her. The group headed back the way they'd come. Kuramaru sniffed the air to find the path, and Kamate stayed by Inuzuka Claw's side, using medical ninjutsu to help her heal. The burns on her back had closed up, but the skin looked dry. Underneath, there was still a deep, searing burn. It was like dead tissue, resisting Kamate's medical ninjutsu, or like a parched desert, desperately soaking up every drop of moisture but never getting enough. Since Inuzuka Claw wasn't in good shape, they weren't moving fast. Suddenly, a huge mushroom cloud bloomed in the distance. Then came the deafening boom of the explosion. The ground shook, and the trees swayed. Even from far away, Inuzuka Claw and her friends could feel the immense power. Of the blast. Oh crap. Inuzuka Claw blurted out. She left Kamate behind, strode up to Kuramaru, and hopped on his back. Kuramaru, let's go, quick. Kuramaru rolled his eyes. I'm not a pack animal. Inuzuka Claw didn't care. Let's go. Umino-sensei and the others are in trouble. She turned to Kamate. Kamate, keep up. We're speeding up. Okay. Kamate replied, channeling wind chakra into his feet to keep up with Kuramaru. The mushroom cloud made Inuzuka Claw and Kamate think the worst. Knowing Umino's strength, they couldn't believe he could defeat someone who used such powerful ninjutsu. In fact, Inuzuka Claw didn't think Umino could have survived, but she had to get there, check things out, and cover for his squad. Inuzuka Claw held tight to Kuramaru's neck. Her teeth clenched. Kamate's eyes were red, and he kept his head down. Hurrying on, they weren't even thinking that if Ye Cang had beaten Umino, they'd be heading straight back towards Sunegakure's main force, where they'd probably run right into Ye Cang. They were just focused on rescuing their friends. In their hearts, they'd already overcome their fear of facing a powerful enemy. After a long time, the shockwave from the explosion finally died down. A cloud of dust and smoke filled the forest, and Kamate struggled to lean against a tree. Peering ahead, a figure appeared, stumbling toward them. Who was it? Kamate watched nervously. Slowly, the figure emerged from the smoke, and its pace quickened. Kamate squinted, recognizing Ye Cang. Had Ye Cang won the ninjutsu showdown? Kamate swallowed hard. Chapter 62 Run, Ye Cang. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It was obvious that Ye Cang had won. Xiong Shou's eyes were bloodshot. He gritted his teeth, wanting to attack Ye Cang, but the throbbing pain in his limbs kept him pinned down. No, gotta stay calm. Bare Hand forced himself to breathe, thought for a moment, then tightened his grip on the kunai wrapped with explosive tags. He slid down the tree trunk, using his hands to brace himself. His body went limp so that only his chest and head were still visible. He closed his eyes, holding his breath. From a distance, Xiong Shou could pass for dead. With his only good hand, he held the explosive kunai, concealed behind his back, straining to hear Ye Cang's approach. Closer, closer. Ye Cang would never miss a chance to finish off a leaf ninja. Even if that ninja looked dead. Then, I'll turn the tables. You sure Xiong Shou will make Ye Cang pay, even if it costs me my life. Closer. Xiong Shou listened to Ye Cang's footsteps, nerve stretched to the breaking point. Footsteps close enough to touch. Suddenly, they stopped. Did she see through me? She's gonna rush in to check, right? Xiong Shou thought, his mind racing. After a beat, the footsteps resumed. Closer. Get close enough, and Mr. Bare Hand has a nasty surprise waiting. Xiong Shou was about to snap his eyes open, but the footsteps didn't stop. They got farther away, and fast. What's going on? Doesn't she even want to check? You sure Xiong Shou, a dignified leaf chunin, don't even rate a second glance from Ye Cang. A surge of anger welled up inside Xiong Shou, stronger than when he'd learned about Umino Iruka and Kakugi falling in battle. He ripped open his eyes and saw Ye Cang running away, arms flailing, faster. And the hair that wasn't burned off bounced with every stride. What the hell? How dare she treat me like nothing? Ignoring the agony, he heaved himself up, hobbled forward, and put every last ounce of strength into hurling the explosive kunai. Go to hell, Ye Cang. That with the throw, his balance failed him and Kuma hand collapsed, but before he could cry out, he braced himself on one hand and strained to see Ye Cang's reaction. Ye Cang had clearly heard the shout and the kunai launching behind her, but didn't even flinch. She threw a hand sign and vanished in a poof. Whoosh! Ye Cang disappeared. Before Kuma hand could blink, another teleportation spell had launched and taken Ye Cang away for good. Boom! The explosive kunai detonated, leaving a shallow crater. Kumatote stared, dumbstruck. Ye Cang, that shadow-level hotshot, just ran away. Ran? Konoha Chunin, Yusher Kumate, and that famous star. Just then, he heard an angry yell. Ye Cang! He whirled around. It was Kakugi, Kakuzu, fireballs swirling around him, stormed over, veins bulging. Kakugi! Kyumote called out. Kyumate! Spotting him, Kakugi rushed over to help him back against the tree. How'd you fall? Did you see Ye Cang? Yeah, she just ran past. I tossed a few explosive kunai, but she teleported away. Damn it! Kakumu snarled. Forget it, don't chase a lost cause. Umino Iruka stepped into view. One of Umino Iruka's arms was charred black and useless. His chunin vest was torn, and a large patch of his abdomen was scorched. Phew! Everyone's okay. Xiong Shou sighed in relief, injured, but alive. Kakumu watched Ye Cang's escape, seething. His fireball jutsu was more efficient than Ye Cang's, and during their exchange of ninjutsu, Ye Cang had been on the ropes. Seeing how the tables were turning, Ye Cang used the smoke screen to create a sand clone and slipped away. Kakugi battled the clone for only a few moments before realizing it was a fake, but it was too late. They caught up just in time to see her escape. Humph! Ye Cang, burning escape won't save you next time, Kakumu vowed, but he wouldn't press his luck. After all, everyone in Umino's class was wounded, and they needed to get it taken care of right away, and who knew what else Ye Cang had up her sleeve. He was still reeling from the time he cornered Suna Ninja and the explosion they had self-inflicted 3 times in a row. If he were to give chase at this point, Kakugi might face a shadow-level powerhouse determined to take him with her. He stared at the wound on his stomach and decided to let Ye Cang go for now. He had inadvertently awakened Burning Escape and it had bolstered his skills considerably. Host, Umino Tsunoki, Comprehensive Combat Strength, A. Chakra Amount, 4.2 Calories, Attributes, Wind, Water, Fire, Earth, Thunder, Yin, Yang, Blood Inheritance Limit, Burning Escape, Number of Copies, 1. Except for the overall combat power being improved to A, there are basically no other changes. The Burning Escape copied this time is the main reason for the improvement in overall combat power. Although Kakuzu had managed to push Ye Cang with the burning release, his overall combat power had barely reached Jonin level, and there was still a big gap between him and a Kage-level powerhouse. Kakugi's age, body, combat experience all limit the growth of his combat power. For example, in the Taijutsu Showdown between Kakugi and Ye Cang, his strength and experience were obviously behind that of Ye Cang. Kakugi is now like a chunin who has mastered S-level ninjutsu. The destructive power of ninjutsu is by no means weaker than that of other ninjas, but his shortcomings in other aspects have caused his overall strength to have just reached the level of a jounin. We have to keep working hard and strive to be a ninja with no shortcomings. Kakugi muttered to himself. His 10-year-old age and 10-year-old body placed too many restrictions on him. He shook his head, not wanting to go so far for the time being. Kakugi sat down on the spot and did some emergency treatment for his injuries. Meanwhile, Ye Cang was booking it. The battle with Umino's team had taken too long, and Ye Cang's scorching escape techniques were notoriously chakra-intensive. The extended battle had drained her dry. The pyroblast from their final clash had almost depleted her reserves. The wounds in her chest and abdomen throbbed. She'd hoped to end it quickly, but had ended up on the losing end of that exchange. Chapter 63 Run Ye Cang 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. While Ye Cang couldn't believe it, he had to accept that he'd failed. He didn't know why the kid Umino Tsunoki's chakra had suddenly spiked, but he was injured and running on fumes. Seeing that Kakugi was just as skilled with the burning release as he was, Ye Cang knew he'd lost this fight. Now, all that mattered was getting away. He was willing to swallow his pride, even if it meant running from Luo Sha. When you're staring death in the face, your ego doesn't matter. If he died here, it would all be over. Using the smoke as cover, Ye Cang created a sand clone to fight Kakugi, then turned tail and ran. As he passed Kyumate, the seasoned Ye Cang knew instantly that the Konoha ninja was baiting him. If he wasn't being chased, Ye Cang would have loved to mess with him, but right now, his priority was to get back to the Sunagakure army ASAP. Inuzuka Claw and his team were completely in the dark about all this. As far as they knew, Ye Cang had won that intense ninjutsu showdown. The group pressed on, hearts heavy, secretly hoping the Umino squad was still holding on. Kuramaru, carrying Inuzuka Claw, suddenly stopped, nose twitching. There's a really dangerous chakra ahead, closing in fast. The chakra feels familiar. it's Ye Cang. But his chakra's unstable. He's definitely been in a fight and he's probably hurt. Inazukazuma and Kenfong felt their hearts sink. Ye Cang being here meant he'd dealt with Umino's team. Kenfong fought back tears, his eyes already bloodshot. Inazuka claw slid off Kuramaru's back, sighed deeply, and said, "Get ready to fight." That the voice wasn't loud, but it was full of determination. They didn't bother with tactics or hiding. They stood their ground in the middle of the forest path. This was their battlefield. Soon, a shadowy figure appeared. It was Ye Cang. Ye Cang spotted them immediately. He recognized the Inazuka woman he'd let get away. He could see she was still unsteady on her feet. The injury hadn't healed. Why was she here instead of hiding to recover or meeting up with Konoha? There's no way she's here to stop me, right? Ye Cang thought, suppressing a bitter laugh. No matter why they were here, a fight, in his current state, could be a disaster. It could trap him here, and who knew if that Umino kid, Kakugi, was right behind him. Talk about a role reversal. Inazuka claw had escaped Ye Cang, and now Ye Cang was the one trying to make a quick getaway. Ye Cang was still figuring out his escape plan when he saw a young Chunin charging towards him. The moment Kenfong saw Ye Cang, his heart plummeted. Uncontrollable rage and overwhelming grief flooded his mind. Hot blood rushed to his head, and Kenfong's thoughts went blank. Wind-release chakra crackled around his kunai as he charged straight at Ye Cang. Ye Cang vaguely recognized Kenfong, remembering him as part of Umino's team, but what was with the hate-filled look? Not wanting to waste time, Ye Cang used his teleportation jutsu to dodge Kenfong's attack, then created a sand clone to keep him busy. He ignored Kenfong and kept running forward. Trying to get rid of me first. How insulting. Inazuka claw grinned, seeing Ye Cang heading straight for him. He was already making hand signs, and as Ye Cang approached, he gave Kuramaru the command. Kuramaru. Airborne dynamic tracking. Woof. Kuramaru sprinted towards Ye Cang, leaping into the air and spraying a stream of bright yellow urine at him. Damn! Ye Cang dodged, but his clothes still got splashed. Seeing the urine connect, Inazuka claw grinned and barked, Kuramaru. Beast human clone, double-headed wolf. Kuramaru and Inazuka claw, who just landed, merged and transformed. A puff of white smoke filled the air. A massive black two-headed wolf stood before Ye Cang, saliva dripping from its fangs. Ye Cang backpedaled quickly. Close-quarters combat was the last thing he needed. The two-headed wolf spoke in a low growl, Feng Feng. The wolf leaped, its entire body spinning at high speed. Like a giant, razor-sharp tornado, it followed the scent trail on Ye Cang's clothes. Can't take that head-on. Seeing the high-speed attack, Ye Cang knew that even a graze would be devastating. He quickly made a hand sign, wind release, wind wall. A swirling vortex of sharp wind chakra condensed into a protective wall between Ye Cang and the charging wolf. He wasn't using burning release, not because he underestimated Inazuka claw, but because he was so low on chakra, he had to rely on wind release ninjutsu to survive. Boom! The Feng Feng slammed into the wind wall. The once impenetrable barrier was reduced to paper. It only stalled the attack for a split second before shattering, but that split second was all Ye Cang needed. As the Feng Feng collided with the wind wall, Ye Cang activated his instant body flicker technique. After tearing through the wind wall, the two-headed wolf tried to continue tracking, but was forced to stop. Ye Cang's scent was still there, but he was already too far away for Ylangia to catch up. Inazuka claw had no choice but to undo the jutsu. Kenfong, having dealt with the sand clone, hurried over. They stared at each other in silence. Ye Cang, using the body flicker technique, just ran away. Ran. Inazuka claw was stunned, unless a crazy thought crossed his mind. He glanced at Kenfong, who was looking back at him, eyes wide with shock. Umino's squad defeated Ye Cang. It was no wonder they assumed Ye Cang had wiped out Umino's team. The idea of Umino's squad taking down Ye Cang seemed impossible. The sheer audacity of it rivaled Ye Cang's panicked retreat from Inazuka claw. At least, that's what Inazuka claw thought. We need to find Umino's squad, and fast. Let's head back and see what we can find. Kuramaru suggested, sensing their thoughts. The suggestion was immediately approved. Inazuka claw climbed back onto Kuramaru's back, with Kenfong close behind. they traveled with lighter hearts, now full of hope. A small smile played on Kanfang's lips. Chapter 64 Reunion. You are listening at novelfull.audio. On the other side, Kazuoki was giving his father and Kyuubi some basic first aid after his fight with Ye Cang. Of the four in Umino's class, only Kanfang was a medical ninja, the others didn't know any medical ninjutsu, but Kazuoki was the only one with working hands, so he had to do what he could. He applied pre-made first aid ointment and wrapped them in thick gauze. That was the extent of his abilities. The ointment and gauze would at least prevent inflammation and infection and might speed up healing a little. For real treatment, they'd have to wait until they got back to camp and found a proper medical ninja. I need to practice with the medical ninjas when we get back. Kazuoki thought. Can't be this useless again. Ye Cang's medical ninjutsu had been a real wake-up call. Is it really a burden to know a lot of skills? With his system, Kazuoki never had to worry about spreading himself too thin. After the makeshift first aid, the three of them took a short break. They could hear fighting in the distance, so rushing back to camp was out of the question. Running headfirst into the battlefield was just asking for trouble. Everyone was injured, which would make them a liability. Not an asset. Besides, the camp was probably too busy to deal with 3 wounded guys. Better to rest and wait for the battle to die down. Even if the war dragged on for days, there would be lulls eventually. It would be much safer to return to camp during one of those breaks. Of course, they had to stay hidden. Kazuoki picked a large tree surrounded by thick bushes. They settled down against the tree, hidden by the foliage. Even if a Sunigakure team passed by, they wouldn't be spotted right away. Kazuoki, being the least injured, took the first watch. Umino Ikuku and Kyuubi didn't argue. The continuous fighting and serious injuries had drained them. They choked down some rations and water, then leaned against the tree and passed out. Kazuoki half-squatted, his senses on high alert, focusing on every sound and movement. The distant sounds of ninjutsu and fighting kept him on edge. After a while, a voice broke the silence. No doubt about it, the scent trail ends here. Someone's here. Kazuoki immediately grabbed a kunai and quickly woke Umino Ikuku and Kyuubi. Both of them were good ninjas. They woke up silently, communicating with Kazuoki only with their eyes. Kazuoki slowly raised a finger to his lips, signaling silence. The voices outside didn't seem to notice anything. I bet they're hiding nearby. Claw, do you Jounin have any emergency contact codes? As they spoke, a one-eyed black dog came into view. Kyuubi started to get up, but Umino Ikuku roughly pushed him back down, his eyes warning him to be cautious. In this situation, what you see and hear might not be real. It could be enemy trickery. Kazuoki watched the black dog, waiting. The next moment, Inuzuka Claw and Kanfang appeared. Inuzuka Claw pursed his lips and made a strange whistling sound. Umino Ikuku nodded. It was a specific emergency code used by Konoha Jounin to identify each other on the battlefield. These kinds of secret codes were unique to the ANBU and wouldn't be known by outsiders. Kyuubi glared at Umino Ikuku with resentment. Why don't us ordinary chunin get anything? Do chunin not have any rights? Ignoring Kyuubi, who always wanted to complain even after losing an arm and a leg, Kazuoki stayed put, watching Kanfang closely. Inuzuka Claw kept whistling, but nothing happened. He wrinkled his nose. The scent is definitely here. Just as he was about to call out, Hanfang stepped forward and whispered, the King of Heaven overshadows the tigers of earth. Kazuoki replied, Pagoda suppresses the river demon. This code had been Kazuoki's idea soon after joining the team, and everyone liked it, so they stuck with it. Kazuoki jumped up and out of the bushes first. Umino Ikuku supported Kyuubi and followed. The codes matched, so there was a 99% chance everything was okay. But if anything went wrong, Kazuoki, being the most combat-ready, would be their last line of defense. Inuzuka Claw smacked Kamada on the head. Your team didn't tell you the internal secret code earlier. Kanfang grinned sheepishly, ran over, and gave Kazuoki a tearful hug. Thankfully, nothing bad had happened. Kazuoki relaxed, letting out a sigh of relief. Umino Ikuku helped Kyuubi get up and exchanged greetings with Inuzuka Kuramaru and nodded. Once on the ground, unable to stand, Kyuubi started yelling for Hanfang to come heal him. Kanfang wiped his eyes and rushed over. Kazuoki looked around at everyone. Except for Kanfang, they were all injured, and his own injuries were the least severe. Hanfang's going to be busy. He noticed Inuzuka's injuries didn't seem to be healing. The injuries they had all sustained were from Ye Cang's ninjutsu, but they hadn't been directly hit by burning release. That made all the difference. Those who were directly hit were turned into mummies. Based on Kazuoki's limited medical knowledge, they were still in pain, and their nerve tissue hadn't been completely destroyed, so there was a chance of recovery. He had been optimistic until now. He realized he had underestimated the power of Zhuodun. Hanfang unwrapped the gauze on Kyuumate's hand and gasped. As Hanfang began treating Kyuumate with his healing jutsu, Kyuumate gradually went silent. The burns on his skin healed, and the charring disappeared, but his hands and feet remained as dry as rotten wood. Hanfang sweated profusely, trying to extract the poison, but nothing happened. After finishing with Kyuumate, Kampo went to Umino Iruka, who wordlessly held out his burned arm. Hanfang silently used his medical ninjutsu. After a lot of effort, white new skin even grew on Umino Iruka's arm. But the muscles still didn't respond, and a sharp pain shot through him whenever he tried to move it. His arm felt like a dead branch. Even after Hanfang's best efforts, Umino Iruka knew his arm wouldn't fully recover. The same was true even after medical ninjutsu was used to treat Kyuumate. The forest fell silent. Kazuoki reached out and gently patted Hanfang's shoulder. The simple gesture seemed to break Hanfang. Before Kazuoki could say anything, Hanfang dropped to his knees and buried his face in Kazuoki's chest. Chapter 65 set off again. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Hanfang practically dug his face into the dirt, letting out a strangled cry like a wounded animal. Fat tears plopped down, darkening the ground. I'm useless, Sensei Umino, Kyuumate, Kakugi, Inuzuka-senpai, I'm so sorry. It's all my fault, I'm such a screw-up. I don't know enough about medical ninjutsu. Yuuwawa. As a medical ninja who took his job seriously, there was nothing worse than being unable to help the people in front of him, and what made it even harder was that those people were his comrades, the guys he'd been through thick and thin with. He was stuck watching them get chewed up by injuries he couldn't fix. It meant they couldn't keep being ninja. Despair, pain, and guilt ripped through Hanfang's heart. Everyone was down, even Umino Iruka was silent. It wasn't that anyone wanted to blame Hanfang, but the situation was hitting them hard. The word retirement hung over their heads, but nobody was feeling it more than Hanfang. Years ago, Hanfang had seen a buddy die in his arms, screaming in agony. Ever since, he'd been on edge, determined to never let that happen again. He wanted to be the best medic out there. Now, it felt like history was repeating itself. How could he not be a total wreck? Then, a hand reached down, pulled him up, and gave him a hug. Kakugi grinned at him, his smile reassuring. Hey, Hanfang, snap out of it. There's gotta be another way, right? Hanfang nodded, hiccuping, yeah, you're right. Their injuries still have traces of Ye Cang's scorch release chakra. It's blocking their chakra flow, which is messing up my healing jutsu. I've tried everything to get it out, but nothing works. If there was a medical ninja who could use a chakra scalpel, someone who could pinpoint where that chakra is and cut it out. Hanfang was cut off when Kakugi clapped him on the back, nearly knocking him over. That's it. Piece of cake. We'll be back at camp in no time, and there'll be better medical ninja there. Hanfang wanted to argue, but he kept his mouth shut. That's right. You had me scared there, Hanfang. Thought you were gonna croak. Kumashu yelled. Umino Iruka stepped up, ruffled Hanfang's hair, and said, Don't worry, Hanfang. I believe in you. With your drive, you're gonna be the best medical ninja around someday. Guys, Hanfang's face turned red, and his eyes, which had finally dried, started to water again. Thanks. He didn't say it out loud, but he made sure to remember it. This team's alright. Inuzukazuma sighed. She looked at the scene with a smile, not seeming worried about her own injuries, and acting calm. Alright. Let's go. Umino Iruka waved his hand. We'll wait until it gets dark, when the fighting calms down a bit. That's when we make a run for it back to camp. Everyone was on board with that idea. Kakugi followed close behind, shouting, Don't worry, I'll be the first one to hit those enemies. Kumashu rolled his eyes. TSK, if I wasn't busted up, you wouldn't even get a shot. Han Feng smiled and took Kumashu's hand as they walked. He was used to Kakugi and Kyuumate's bickering. Up ahead, Umino Iruka suddenly smacked his forehead and walked up to Inuzuka Kaku, looking like he wanted to talk. Inuzuka Takashi nodded a few times, glancing at Umino Iruka's useless arm, and suddenly got it. Soon, Inuzuka Talo summoned a ninja hawk and handed it to Umino Kazuo. Umino Iruka grabbed some paper and a pen, scribbled something, and carefully tucked it into the hawk's mailbox. Seeing the questioning looks from his students, Umino Iruka winked. For something this big, beating Ye Cang, HQ's gotta know. Everyone who knew Umino rolled their eyes. Umino Iruka focused on two key things in his letter. Besides praising the team for taking down Ye Cang, he also gave them the real story. Everyone was banged up and couldn't keep fighting, so they were going to lay low and wait for a chance to get back to camp. Since the war was kicking off, Umino Ban had been out of contact with the camp, except for the Ninja Hawk communication. He needed to keep them in the loop. After Ye Cang got away, she'd head straight for the Sunagakure army, and her actions would be noticed. If people compared the stories, they'd see that Umino was telling the truth. Besides, his kid waking up the blaze release was the real deal. He was strong enough to take on Ye Cang, who wasn't in the best shape. Umino Iruka wasn't sweating how he'd explain the burning release to the village elders. The Umino family were Konoha through and through, with friends in high places. In the ninja world, it wasn't unheard of to develop and learn unique bloodline jutsu. His kid was just a little gifted, so what? The brass would probably be happy to have another powerful bloodline in the village. As the only guy in Konoha who could use blaze release, Kakunoki would be on their radar and get special attention. He was too young to be a jounin, but a special jounin wasn't impossible. With this bloodline limit, the Umino family would be on the rise. Who knows? The Umino family might even become a recognized ninja clan someday. Umino Iruka was grinning to himself. Meanwhile, Han Feng and Inuzuka Claw were blown away when they found out Kakunoki had unlocked blaze release. It was enough to get him into the jounin ranks. They both shot envious glances at Kazuoki, but Kakugi, the one they were talking about, wasn't really paying attention. He was more focused on how he was going to explain this blaze release thing. After all, the Umino family didn't have any bloodline traits. For a 10-year-old to develop his own bloodline was insane, and who knew what other bloodline limits Kakugi would copy one day. He couldn't just hide every power he copied, right? Plus, Kakugi knew the stuff that went down in Konoha from the original story. The root, Nabekage, Orochimaru's human experiments. His parents, who were jounin, never talked about it, but Kazuoki had pieced things together. The thought of being strapped to a table and cut open made Kakumu shiver. No more slacking. He had to live up to the hype. Kazuoki was resolved. Luckily, it was possible to develop and learn bloodline skills. As long as he leaned into the genius label and stayed tight with the Hokage group, he'd be safe. Chapter 66 Ye Cang arrives at the battlefield. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ironically, Kakumu, fresh to this world, had scoffed at the will of fire. Now, it seemed like a lot of what he did embodied it. He didn't selflessly dedicate himself to Konoha because of any will of fire. But he was deeply bonded to his family and friends. He just wanted to take care of them. Like any normal person, the time traveler, Kazuoki, had quietly become Umino Kazuoki, a Konoha Chunin, seamlessly integrating into the ninja world. The team moved on. The initial excitement of being reunited faded, and they fell into a quiet rhythm. No one had ordered them to be silent, but they all were. Given the limited information, they didn't know if Sunagakure would send a search party after them. Keeping quiet was the smart move. As they traveled, everyone was lost in their own thoughts. Kakumu worried about being targeted by the village's dark side. Umino Iruka was figuring out how to get his son a better deal. Even though Xiong Shou said he was fine, he was still concerned, since he was the most injured. Han Feng, holding Xiong's hand, just wanted to get back to camp and get his teammate treatment. Inuzuka Inazuma, a total badass, was already asleep on Kuramaru's back, feeling safe with him around. Kuramaru, struggling under Inuzuka's weight, ran ahead, using his sense of smell to scout the area. It would be pretty shocking if Umino and his son knew they were thinking completely different things, and so, the group hurried, and not so hurried, toward the edge of the battlefield, arriving just before dark. The sounds of clashing metal and fighting ninjas echoed through the forest. Without any Byakugan users, they couldn't see much from a distance, just a mass of bodies packed together. Large-scale ninjutsu exploded every so often, followed by screams. "Is this what a battlefield's like?" Kakumu said, seeing it for the first time, curiosity in his eyes. Everyone else had been a ninja longer than he had, especially Umino Iruka and Inuzuka Takashi, who were used to this. Han Feng shuddered at the shrieks and howls. Umino Iruka gently patted his back, offering a few comforting words. "Here," Kuramaru said softly, having found a good hiding spot, and slipped inside. Everyone followed, surrounded by tall trees and thick bushes. Umino held up a finger, signaling silence. Kakumu volunteered to keep watch again. Everyone held their breath, waiting for night to fall. Meanwhile, on the Sunagakure Konoha battlefield, a Hyuga ninja stood next to Jiraiya, constantly observing and reporting on the situation. Suddenly, his eyes narrowed. "I've found a target approaching rapidly from behind the Sunagakure army. The target's chakra is powerful but erratic. They appear to be injured. And they're concealing their identity." Jiraiya's expression turned serious. He remembered the mushroom cloud in Area 8. This must be the sand ninja who fought Umino's group. Who was it? Yakura? Or the third Kazekage? Either way, Umino's group was probably doomed. "Raza is approaching Sunagakure at high speed, and we can see who it is," Jiraiya asked quickly. "Who?" If it was a Kage-level ninja, it could change the course of the war. The Hyuga ninja seemed to be struggling to identify the person. Finally, under Jiraiya's anxious gaze, he said, "It's almost certain, it's Pakura of the Scorch release. Pakura's in rough shape. She's missing half her hair. She's seriously injured, with burns all over and a penetrating wound in her abdomen. Wait. She's retreating." Pakura's emergency medical ninjutsu and attempts at concealment were no match for the Byakugan. Jiraiya perked up, then fell silent again. Umino's squad severely wounded Pakura, who might not be able to contribute much to the battle now. Too bad Umino didn't make it back. Jiraiya closed his eyes, offering a moment of silence for Umino's team. "Jiraiya-sama, urgent message from a ninja hawk." Jiraiya was surprised. Who would be sending a message now? Could something have happened back at the village? He took the letter and unfolded it. After a moment, a smile spread across his face. He raised his right hand, waving the letter. Pakura of the Scorch release was defeated by our Chunin Umino Kazuoki. To boost morale, Jiraiya announced the news, revealing Kazuoki's identity. The Konoha ninjas repeated the inspiring words, spreading the news across the battlefield. Their morale soared. The faces of the Sunagakure ninjas across the field turned ashen. Pakura, a Kage-level expert, was defeated by a Chunin. Wait, wasn't this Umino Kazuoki the same guy who killed 2 Sunagakure Jonin before? Jiraiya vouched for it, and the rumors about the kid being a genius registered in Sunagakure were being passed around. Pakura's secretive appearance, followed by her disappearance, had already sparked speculation. Jiraiya's announcement was the last straw. Pakura's backup has been seriously injured. The third Kazekage isn't showing up, and who knows when that's going to happen. Jiraiya decided to seize the moment. With morale high and the enemies low, he'd strike fast. He bit his thumb, weaved hand signs, and slammed his hand on the ground. Summoning jutsu, with a poof, a giant toad appeared in a puff of white smoke. Gamabunta, pipe in mouth and sword at his side. Jiraiya stood atop Gamabunta, hands on his hips, full of energy. "Konoha ninjas, follow me. Charge." Yeah. Following Jiraiya's lead, the Konoha ninjas launched a counterattack. Gamabunta jumped into the Sunagakure formation, wreaking havoc. The sand ninja ranks fell into chaos. On the Sunagakure side, Pakura covered her head with a black cloth, found Raza, and quickly showed her face, explaining the situation before hurrying off to get medical treatment. Raza was silent. His face was dark and stormy. Pakura had managed to escape, but barely. If the other ninjas had seen her in that condition, their morale would have completely collapsed. At least now, with Pakura's head covered, there was still a chance to recover. And Lord Kazekage? Why hadn't he arrived yet? Raza felt like he was about to explode. Everyone was so unreliable. He couldn't help but curse, even though his mentor was being implicated. Chapter 67 Red Sand Scorpion. You are listening at novelfull.audio. He barked orders at his subordinates to send the psychic lizard to contact Feng Ying again, then looked up to see a giant toad. Luo Sha's forehead veins throbbed, and his control snapped. Damn Konoha, they're taking advantage, but he rapidly formed hand seals and slammed them against the ground. Magnetic release, golden sand waves, with both shadow-level experts in action, the war's intensity spiked. In a secret location, another battle unfolded. Iron sand drizzle, stone-like iron sand shot towards his opponent at breakneck speed, who stood frozen, seemingly unable to dodge. Bang, 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 the iron sand hit its mark, but only produced dull thuds, failing to break through the defense. As the dust cleared, a humanoid puppet wearing a mask and crouching on all fours appeared. It's no use, third Kazekage, give it up. I still haven't found an antidote for Feilyohu's poison. The puppet swung its thick, steel tail, which glowed faintly blue. The third Kazekage panted, his face turning blue. He clutched his knees, sweat pouring down, and glared at the puppet. Around him lay several sand ninja, all dead from the poison. Hiryuko. If I remember correctly, that's Iwagakure's Jonin, Iwayama Ishii. You've broken a taboo, Scorpion. Ha! Xie's low, raspy voice echoed through Feilyohu. So-called taboos are just limits on genius. It's a hurdle that must be crossed in pursuit of eternal art. Become part of my eternal art, third Kazekage. You will have eternal life. Scorpion's excitement grew, his tone fanatical. Humph. The third Kazekage looked at Xie with disdain. You're no longer worthy of being called a ninja, murdering your comrades and breaking taboos. Today, I'll correct the village's mistake. The third Kazekage instantly channeled all his chakra and unleashed his strongest move. Sand-iron boundary method. An overwhelming torrent of iron sand surged toward Scorpion. Even if I die here, I'll rid Sunagakure of you. Feilyohu shook his head slightly, and Xie's voice came. Why bother clinging on? It's all show. How much of the sand-iron boundary method can you muster when you're already poisoned? Xie controlled Feilyohu, charging towards the oncoming iron sand. Soon, the sand and iron fell feebly. The scorpion's thick tail pierced the third Kazekage's body, lifting him high. Scorpion sighed softly. Tell me, why resist? Isn't eternity appealing? Blood trickled from the third Kazekage's mouth. He glared at Feilyohu and spat. Never. With a final struggle, he raised his fingers and formed the last hand seal. Iron sand triangle. The iron sand scattered on the ground instantly condensed into a rapidly spinning triangular pyramid that slammed into the third Kazekage himself. Humph, naive. Xie scoffed. Feilyohu raised its tail, instantly dodging the iron sand triangle. The massive iron sand triangle struck the ground, but produced little noise, collapsing the moment it almost touched. Ha! Xie looked at the third Kazekage on his tail, confused. The third Kazekage was silent, his eyes wide and dull. His head was tilted back, mouth open, as if roaring his frustration at the sky. The strongest Kazekage of Sand-Hidden Village had fallen. Scorpion gently lowered the third Kazekage, stroking his face with the tip of his tail, as if handling a priceless treasure. After carefully sealing the third Kazekage into a summoning scroll and hastily burying the other sand ninjas, Scorpion turned and left elegantly on the Hirolyu amber. A gust of wind swept through, filling the sky with yellow sand, burying all traces of the third Kazekage. On this day, Sand-Hidden Village lost both its strongest Kazekage and its most talented puppet. Master, back on the battlefield, Konoha and Sunagakure were oblivious to these events, still locked in fierce combat. Konoha, defending its home, and Sand Ninja, fighting for survival, formed a giant grinder of flesh and blood. Kakugi, on alert duty, watched from afar, sighing softly. No wonder Jiraiya is desperately searching for the child of prophecy and seeking peace. Looking at the giant toads mowing down the battlefield, the Akimichi clan swinging giant clubs, and Luo Sha's overwhelming artillery attacks, you understood the odds for ordinary ninjas on the battlefield. So, you have to become stronger. Kakugi's idea was simple: in this ninja world, strength comes first, become stronger, gain the strength to protect yourself and your family. Even if you want to change this cruel world, you need the power. Even Naruto, with his talk no jutsu, had the strength to stand at the top. Kakugi reaffirmed his ninja path. Now that he had burning release, he would develop it further. Kakugi didn't have a burning release teacher. Aside from Ryuken Wakahu, adapted from wind release vacuum blade, he'd only copied Ye Cang's steaming kill. Ye Cang's other techniques, burning flame fall and pyroblast, were more advanced uses of oversteaming. The pyroblast Kakugi used differed greatly from Higura's. Maybe he could use other ninjutsu as a reference for developing burning release. Kakugi thought, with his experience with the wind release vacuum blade, Lu-Ren Ruohuo appeared smoothly. The success of Ryuken Ruohuo provided considerable guidance. Other release techniques couldn't be neglected either. Kakugi remembered that after copying burning release, the system indicated that he'd met the conditions for using it, then successfully copied it and transformed his body. In other words, even if he copied dust release later, he'd need a certain level of proficiency with the nature and shape transformation of wind, earth, and fire chakra. Even for Sharingan, Kakugi guessed release chakra proficiency was needed. The system planted seeds and helped them grow, but the host had to prepare the soil. Even with the system, he couldn't slack off. Kakugi smiled wryly. His system removed the barriers to acquiring ninjutsu, physical prowess, and bloodline abilities, but only gave him a very high ceiling for growth, not instant invincibility. Keep up the good work. Chapter 68 Ye Cang, I approve of you. You are listening at novelfold.audio. As the day wore on, the sun began its descent in the west. The battlefield still echoed with the sounds of combat, a deadly stage for bloodshed and loss. Feng offered to relieve Kakumu, who gratefully accepted, having been without rest for too long. Umino Iruka and the others were catching some shut-eye, while Kazuoki leaned against Feng, his eyes half closed. Feng was ready to wake him at the first sign of trouble. The red glow of sunset painted the sky as the fighting gradually subsided. Gamabunta vanished back to Mt. Mayaboku, Akimichi Dingzao shrank back to his normal size, and the sandstorms dissipated. Raza glared at Jiraiya, who just waggled his eyebrows in a taunting manner. As darkness fell, both sides called an unspoken truce, silently separating into opposing camps. A day-long battle had ended in a stalemate, so they retreated to regroup for another day. Konoha and Sunagakure watched each other carefully as they slowly withdrew. It was noticeable that both sides retreated in sync, maintaining almost the same distance. Jiraiya and Raza remained at the head of their respective lines, leading the charge and covering the retreat. Only after Konohagakure had safely retreated into their camp and Sunagakure had cautiously pulled back some distance did they turn and head towards their temporary bases. Back at camp, after making arrangements, Raza went to check on Ye Cang. Her most serious injury was a deep puncture wound, only temporarily treated. The internal damage remained. With internal injuries involving several organs, the local medical ninjas couldn't realistically bring Ye Cang back to fighting condition anytime soon. Plus, she had burns all over her body. To make matters worse, she had pushed herself too hard, continuing to fight and using ninjutsu after being injured, making everything worse. She had forced herself to put on a strong front for the Suna ninja. Ye Cang was going to be out of action for a while, unless Elder Chiyo came to the rescue personally. But with the third Kazekage leading the team, Chiyo had to oversee things back in the village. Seeing Ye Cang's condition, Raza felt a headache coming on. Trying to stay calm, he asked quietly, Ye Cang, what happened out there? Ye Cang, lying on the bed, turned her head to look at Raza, sighing softly. This defeat had deflated both her and Raza's competitive spirits. Raza, do you believe in true genius? Raza hadn't expected that question. Raising his eyebrows in confusion, aren't we both supposed to be geniuses? Of course, with his personality and political savvy, he wouldn't say that out loud. As if reading his thoughts, Ye Cang sighed again. Umino Kakugi, a 10-year-old Konoha Chunin, used an S-rank water release jutsu to wipe out my Murakami squad over a year ago. She recounted the information Sunagakure village had collected on Umino Kakugi, word by word. Finally, she added, and now he's added another line to his resume, awakened lava release during his fight against Ye Cang and then beat her. Compared to him, I can't even pretend to be a genius. She smiled, a little bitterly, at Raza. It was like being washed away by the next big wave. It wouldn't break her completely, but it definitely changed her mindset. She no longer had the desire to compete with Raza. Hearing Ye Cang's story, Raza's eyes widened, so the rumors about Konoha were true. Then, something clicked, and he asked quickly, what about Umino Tsunoki? Ye Cang knew what he was thinking and shook her head. He was caught in the blast radius of a scorching release. Konoha's medical ninjas should be able to patch him up. This. Raza was speechless. He clenched his fists and slammed them on the ground in frustration. How could Konoha have so many geniuses? Sunagakure had mobilized the entire village, bringing together the third Kazekage, Ye Cang, Raza, and rising stars like Xia. They launched a full-scale attack on Konoha, and the result? Ye Cang was seriously injured. Kazekage and Sasori were missing. Jiraiya and Inoshikacho were tough enough, and now there was Umino Kakuzu. Raza's ninjutsu was effective against large summons, but facing Jiraiya and the giant toad, along with the Akimichi clan's giant form, it was still hard to survive alone. Taking a deep breath to calm down, he forced a smile and tried to comfort Ye Cang. They had never really gotten along, and she had made mistakes in this battle, but now wasn't the time to bring that up, and besides, Ye Cang's injury wasn't her fault. Technically speaking, the more talented people Konoha churned out, the more Sunagakure village needed Ye Cang. Ye Cang watched him from the bed, listening to his comforting words, and felt a strange mix of emotions, not love or anything, but she suddenly felt like she had been too hard on him in the past. Raza spoke for a few more minutes, then turned to leave. As he was about to step out of the tent, Ye Cang called out. Raza. Yeah, that he turned back. Ye Cang gave him a thumbs up and smiled. You're actually pretty good at this Kazekage thing. Haha. He grinned, his smile genuine this time, and returned the gesture. You know it. After leaving the tent, Raza went to the medical tent to give everyone a morale boost. After what felt like an eternity, he finally found some free time and returned to the temporary command post. He slumped into a chair and sighed, hoping to ease his weary body and mind. He looked at his subordinates and asked casually, any word from the Kazekage? Nothing yet, sir. Raza frowned and stood up, pacing back and forth. Something was wrong. So far, he had used the psychic lizard to send a total of 3 messages to the third Kazekage. The first 2 reported their marching route and the start of the battle with Konoha. The third was a message sent during the toughest part of the battle, reporting Ye Cang's defeat and serious injuries and mentioning Jiraiya's giant summon. Raza had been stretched thin then, so there was a hint of urgency in the letter. He hadn't expected a response to the first 2, but he was sure the third Kazekage would have replied to the third one as soon as he read it. Based on his understanding of the third Kazekage, he should have responded as soon as Ye Cang and Umino Kabutoki created that mushroom cloud. Chapter 69 Looking for Feng. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Out of confidence in the third Kazekage's strength, Luo Sha didn't overthink things on the battlefield, only sending messages to hurry him along when the war was at its most intense. But a day had passed, and the third Kazekage still hadn't arrived, not even a word. A few beads of sweat popped on Luo Sha's forehead. A terrifying suspicion bloomed in his mind, something he couldn't even bear to imagine. Impossible, absolutely impossible. Regaining his composure, Luo Sha appeared calm and, with seeming casualness, ordered his subordinates, get Kurosaki, Mayachi Akameru, Kurata II, Tayama Tifeng, and Maeda Ryomo in here. As the subordinates left to carry out his orders, Luo Sha unfolded the battle map on his desk, studying it intently. Soon, the 5 men stood before him. These were Luo Sha's most trusted confidants. Elite jonin of the village. His brother-in-law, Yashimaru, was also in the army, but as a medical ninja, it wasn't appropriate to include him in this mission. Luo Sha continued to pore over the map, and silence hung in the tent. Finally, he slowly looked up and gestured for his subordinates to stand guard outside. Soon, only Luo Sha and the 5 jonin remained inside. Luo Sha formed a hand seal, casting a soundproof barrier. The 5 men's hearts skipped a beat. Whatever they were about to hear was top secret. Luo Sha slowly approached them, his eyes narrowed and his lips a thin line as he scanned their faces. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice low and hoarse, like the dry, rain-starved desert. The Kazekage hasn't returned yet. At first glance, it sounded like normal conversation, but everyone present was a Sunagakure standout. The implications hit them like a ton of bricks, their expressions shifting dramatically. Like Luo Sha, their absolute faith in the 3rd Kazekage's power had kept them from even considering this possibility. Now, Luo Sha had spoken the words aloud, and they knew him well enough to know he wouldn't do so without reason. Could it be that the Kazekage? No, nothing could happen to the Kazekage. If it were true, the sky above Sunagakure would. Seeing their reactions, Luo Sha sighed, deflated. In these uncertain times, some things couldn't be said directly. It was better if everyone understood on their own. He was sure they understood why he'd called them here. The stakes were high, speed and stealth were essential. Above all, Konoha couldn't find out. He motioned them closer, unfolding the map. The Kazekage chose a very secluded resting place. Only he and his personal guards know its location. Even I'm in the dark. He pointed to the 5 areas marked on the map. Based on the terrain and my understanding of the Kazekage, I've identified these 5 locations as the most likely places to find him. Each of you will choose your most loyal and capable subordinates and search one of these locations. We need to make contact with the Kazekage. Luo Sha lifted his head, nodding in satisfaction at their solemn faces. Act with speed and discretion. We can't let Konoha catch on to your movements. Understood. Yes, sir, they replied in unison and quickly left the camp. Haisha lingered behind. Once the others were gone, he hurried over to Luo Sha and whispered, Lord Luo Sha, what about Ye Cang? Haisha mimed slitting his throat. Knock it off, Haisha. Luo Sha exploded, grabbing Haisha by the neck and slamming him to the ground. Don't be a smart-ass. Luo Sha roared, his face contorted with anger. There's no problem between me and Ye Cang. He jabbed a finger at Haisha, nearly hitting his face. I'll handle things with Ye Cang myself. Now, get going on your mission. Luo Sha kicked Haisha in the rear for good measure, and Haisha scrambled out of the tent. Once he was gone, Luo Sha sighed again, deeply. He hadn't sighed this much in the past month. That Haisha always had to try to be clever, even when it was completely inappropriate. Was this really the time for internal squabbles? Even when Luo Sha's relationship with Ye Cang was at its worst, he wouldn't just casually offer. Besides, Ye Cang had just done him a solid. He rubbed his temples, a headache brewing. He needed to talk to Ye Cang about all of this, given her status and the fact that she was the only shadow-level ninja in the camp. She needed to know. Luo Sha dispelled the soundproof barrier and strode out of the tent. Outside, the moon shone brightly, the stars scattered across the sky. Night had fully descended. The battlefield from the day was dotted with dozens of ninjas, all busy with their tasks. With nightfall, Konoha and Sunagakure had reached a tacit truce. Each side sent out ninjas to collect the bodies of their fallen comrades. Whether they were Konoha or Sand ninjas, they all stuck to their tasks and followed the rules. No one would think of beheading corpses or stealing belongings. If they stumbled upon a body from the other village or found a living ninja, they would politely point it out, never taking cheap shots. When they met, they'd exchange greetings, even if they'd been fighting each other just hours before. An odd harmony. At the end of the day, no one really wanted war. Kakumu stared at the scene in disbelief. As soon as night fell, Feng, the security chief, roused everyone. After a quick discussion, they immediately set off for the camp. Umino Iruka had instructed everyone to be as quiet as possible, but he wasn't nearly as cautious as he had been on the way in. Kakumu was puzzled, especially when he saw dozens of sand ninjas collecting bodies on the battlefield. Umino Iruka smirked. Just don't let the sand ninjas think we're here to attack. Then, a bit uneasily, he added, and don't let them recognize you. You'd better use a transformation jutsu. Kakumu was confused. But then it dawned on him what his identity meant to the Sand Ninjas. He could just imagine the chaos if he yelled out that Kakumu, the guy who defeated Higura, was here. The Sand Ninjas would break the truce and attack in a heartbeat. Kakumu had no choice but to take his advice, morphing into a Merino Hiki lookalike and blending into the group. Seeing Kakumu staring at the battlefield, Umino Iruka chuckled and raised an eyebrow. "What do you think? Didn't expect this, did you?" "No, I really didn't expect that the people we were fighting during the day would be so peaceful at night." Kakumu was a little embarrassed, thinking back to how nervous he'd been when they set out. Chapter 70 Back to Camp. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Hanging around on the battlefield long enough, you start to get it, Ikuku Umino said with a sigh. Back in the last great ninja war, I was a fresh-faced jounin, leading my first team. I took them out to collect bodies, and one kid nearly wet himself, he was so freaked out. No kidding. What happened then? Kazuoki asked, playing along. Umino Iruka seemed to drift away in thought. That was during the war between Konoha and Suna in the Land of Rivers. That kid ran into another kid, a sand ninja, doing the same thing. And the sand ninja kid gave him a bag of camel jerky. Wow, so what happened next? Kazuoki asked, now totally drawn into the story. Everyone else nearby was all ears too. Meeting a friend from the enemy side on a battlefield, that's pretty amazing. Umino Iruka suddenly stopped, like he'd remembered something awful, and shook his head. His tone got heavier. The next day, that kid died. Killed by that sand ninja kid. He had a pack of dried fish with him, a gift to give back. The silence that fell was thick enough to cut with a knife. Nobody asked what happened to the sand ninja kid. Umino Iruka shook his head, a sad smile on his face, and sighed. That's war for you. Kakumu sighed silently to himself. That's a ninja's life. The group walked in silence towards the edge of the battlefield. The nearest sand ninja immediately noticed them. Young Suna ninja muttered to his captain as they approached. "Captain, these Konoha ninja are coming from the area we control." Under the moonlight, the sand ninja captain glanced at Umino Iruka's group, then looked away. "Doesn't matter. They're all beat up. Probably some of the Konoha sentinels we missed during the sweep. They were probably hiding out for a day, waiting for a chance like this. They're not going to cause any trouble. But the young sand ninja, probably a newbie, seemed troubled. This scene just didn't sit right with the sand ninja's worldview. "Relax," the captain said, clearly a veteran. "Our priority is bringing back our fallen. As long as they don't interfere with our mission." With that, the sand ninja captain gave Umino Iruka a friendly wave. Umino Iruka smiled and waved back. "Okay." The young Suna ninja reluctantly agreed, and so, the trip back to Konoha was uneventful. As Umino Iruka's group approached, Konoha ninjas came to check their IDs. Umino Iruka stepped forward, exchanged the code with a Konoha jounin in charge of handling the corpses, and they bumped fists. "I thought you weren't coming back, Iruka. Can't leave you yet, pal. You'd miss me too much. Ha ha ha. Ha ha ha." They bantered back and forth, and the jounin called over a chunin, gave him some instructions, and then led Umino Iruka back to camp. Umino Iruka waved everyone else to follow. "Who's that?" Kazuoki asked, puzzled. Xiongshou and Hanfang looked at each other and shrugged. Inuzuka Claw knew a little something. Jounin Miyoshi Kazuhiko, he works in camp logistics. He always finds excuses to delay or even hold back supplies. He's not exactly Mr. Popular. Inuzukazuma lowered his voice for the last part, making sure only those closest could hear. Kakugi suddenly understood. No wonder their team supplies were always on time and complete. Kakumu suddenly saw his father in a new light. He'd never seen his father interact with Miyoshi Kazuhiko before. Led by Miyoshi Kazuhiko, the group entered the camp smoothly and headed towards the medical station. Before entering the camp, Kakumu dropped the transformation technique. Miyoshi Kazuhiko wasn't surprised. He'd heard that Umino Iruka's son was registered in Suna. He just looked at Kakugi with curious eyes. After all, Jiraiya's roar on the battlefield that day was hard to miss. Kakugi had a record of killing 2 Suna jounin as a genin. but defeating the shadow-level powerhouse Hayakura was still hard to believe. They reached the medical station quickly. It was Kakumu's second time there. He'd brought Marino Ibiki last time. Back then, the medical station hadn't been too crowded. There hadn't been any major fighting, but this time, the smell hit him like a wall. Blood, herbs, pus, and sweat all mixed together in a horrible stench. It wasn't a medical station so much as a wounded soldier's camp. It wasn't exactly packed, but there were injured people everywhere. Umino Iruka was just a regular jounin, not important enough for a private room like Higura. Miyoshi Kazuhiko had people clear out some space and set up some folding cots for the wounded. After whispering a few words to Umino Iruka, he went over to the medical ninjas, who were working non-stop. One of the assistants spoke briefly to Miyoshi Kazuhiko. Meanwhile, the wounded soldiers who could move all stared at Tsunoki, like he was some kind of freak. Ever since Kakugi had killed 2 jounin as a genin, he'd become a mini-celebrity. Plenty of people knew him, and the ones who didn't wanted to see the kid who took down Hayakura. Luckily, everyone was injured and trying to recover, so they were somewhat respectful, and there was no mobbing or anything. At that moment, Umino Iruka pulled out a secret letter from his vest and handed it to Feng. Inuzuka Claw did the same, stuffing a secret letter into Kuramura's mouth. The only member of the team who wasn't hurt listened carefully to their instructions. After a little while, 1 person and 1 dog left the camp to deliver the mission report to headquarters. The Konoha Ninja Code had rules for this. Injured ninjas got priority medical treatment, and teammates or others could handle the mission report. Intelligence was top priority for ninjas, so there was no time to waste. While they rested, Umino Iruka and Inuzuka Takashi wrote detailed secret letters about their experiences on this mission. Kamada and Kuramura only needed to deliver the letters and answer some questions. These jounin-written secret letters had a special encryption method. Forcing them open without the key would cause the letter to self-destruct. Kakumu lay on the cot, patiently waiting for a medical ninja to show up. The injuries of the 4 of them had already been treated with Kampo herbs and first aid. Now, they just needed a skilled medical ninja to finish the job. Specifically, he needed a medical ninja who knew how to use the chakra scalpel. After a little while, Miyoshi Kazuhiko came back, walking quickly. He didn't look happy, so it probably hadn't gone well.